This episode is made possible by U.S. Bank and Brex, the AI-powered spend platform.
Hi, it's Tony Bohr, CFO of Blackbaud, and you're listening to the CFO Thought Leader Podcast.
This is a bonus replay episode.
You know, we did time and motion studies in our restaurants, and we spent a lot of time looking at those type of aspects, gathering a lot of data, looking at the conveyance in the kitchen and all those things. And yeah, we're, lo and behold, you know, in the back half of 2024, we're going to build a much smaller restaurant. And it's going to have not only benefits on the cost side and the return side for investors, but on the team members' end, it's going to be easier for them to work and convey. And a Portillo's kitchen is very long and it's big. And so getting that engine right in the car was super important to us.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's show, we speak with Michelle Hook, CFO of Portillo's. It was late 2020 when Michelle Hook ended 17 years of fruitful career building at Domino's to accept a CFO appointment at Midwestern restaurant chain Portillo's. Fast forward 15 months when the Omicron variant was still grabbing headlines and inflation had begun to rattle the economy. Hook tells us she could not escape the notion that the traditional Portillo's restaurant model needed to change for the post-COVID world. The subject soon surfaced at an executive strategy session, and Hook, along with Portillo's head of marketing, was soon tasked with leading an initiative dubbed the Restaurant of the Future. You'll hear about that project and much more on today's episode. We'll begin after this. Have you heard about Brex? It's the world's smartest corporate card. Finance leaders love it because it's got powerful controls and rewards that help them make every dollar count. Here's why Brex cards are so smart. You can embed your expense policy inside the card. This lets you control employee spending before it even happens. Brex cards also automate manual expense, tasks like receipts, memos, and reviews. So you're free to focus on optimizing your company finances. Over 25,000 companies take every dollar further with Brex. Join them at brex.com/grow. Hello, we're speaking to Michelle Hook, CFO of Portillo's. Michelle, welcome.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks for having me.
So, Michelle, if you wouldn't mind, we're going to begin where we always do, which is to put you on the spot, ask you to look back for us, and try to identify some of those experiences you feel really prepared you to become a finance leader. What comes to mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've enjoyed my run, Jack, but for me, my career just from the beginning starts out with my experience I had in public accounting at Arthur Andersen. So right out of Michigan State, I went to work at then one of the big six firms. And as most listeners or you might know, those are excruciating hours that you work in public accounting. So think, 80-hour work weeks. But I can tell you that I wouldn't change a thing. I think I just learned a ton about how business works. I really learned how to lead. I think about, I'm less than a year out of school and I'm managing teams. I'm managing audit teams, right? As a 22-year-old person right out of school, I'm leading and managing audit engagements. And so for me, it was putting myself in that leader position early on, which was not comfortable, all the while where I'm still trying to learn how the world works, how business works.
Can I ask, what geography were you in?
So I worked out of the Detroit office at Arthur Andersen. And so most of my clients were based in the Detroit area. And so think very heavy automotive clients, right? And things of that nature. And so for me, I think when I think back, the other thing that I learned is where my passions lied and what mattered to me most, right? And so when I think back to that time, I knew pretty quickly that I didn't want to be an auditor in my career. But at the time, I had to spend 2 years in public accounting to get my CPA. So I had to quote unquote do my time, right? Which I wouldn't change a thing, but I did have the experience to work on a number of different audit clients and industries, whether it's automotive or healthcare or public universities. But actually, one of my audit clients ended up being Domino's Pizza, which we'll get to, I know, in a few in terms of how that changed my trajectory in my career. But I had a chance to see that industry and feel what that was about. And I grew up working in food service and worked at McDonald's in high school and worked retail in college and things of that nature. So that really spoke to me. So I put in 3 years at Arthur Andersen. I was very successful there. I remember when I told them I was leaving, the head of HR said, "I think you're making a mistake." And I said, "Well, I don't think so." And so I went to another company called Wholesome, which ended up being a position that I followed my mentor to, and they were starting up a financial analyst group, and that spoke to me. But I'd say what I learned there is just again putting myself in positions to run towards challenges. So I spent about 3.5 years there, and the thing that stands out to me there is one of their largest plants in Texas. Essentially, the entire accounting staff left, and I had been growing up doing auditing, accounting, and so I raised my hand and I said, "Look, I'll go into that plan as the temporary controller and help to stabilize things." So I spent about a year going back and forth between Detroit and Texas and helping to stabilize that accounting team and that function at their largest plant. And all the while while I was at Wholesome, I stayed in contact with a former colleague that I worked with on the Domino's audit. He eventually went to Domino's and became the controller. He had left Arthur Andersen. And for about 2 years, Jack, he would call me and try and lure me over to Domino's to come work with him. And, he said, "Look, I worked on the acquisition on the audit side when Domino's was sold. Tom Monahan sold the company to Bain Capital." And so he said, "Look, Michelle, I know you know this company. I know you know that Bain owns us. They're a great PE firm, and we want to go public. And I know you know public company reporting. I know you know all these things, and I want you to come work with me." So he, again, it was years in the making, but in 2003, I took the leap and went to work with him at Domino's, and he created a role for me, a manager in the accounting group. And then over the course of my 18-year career, just did a number of different things. But, a couple things stood out to me. We IPO'd in 2004, so I had a chance to work on that. We were one of the first companies to do a whole business securitization in the restaurant sector, so had a chance to work on that in 2007. But basically, after I was there 10 years, I woke up and said, "Look, I had been doing like core accounting and financial reporting for 10 years and running all the different layers of accounting, doing the financial reporting, writing the 10Ks, the 10Qs." And I said, I want to do something different. I feel like I'm not challenging myself enough. And so I remember going into the CFO's office and saying, "Look, I want to do something different. I want to get out of accounting and reporting, and I don't know what that is, but I'm hoping we can figure this out." And he was very open. He said, "Michelle, absolutely, we'll figure this out." And I said, "Great. Well, while we're doing that, I'm going to go back to school and get my MBA," which was, at the time, seems a bit crazy. It wasn't like they forced me to do that or said, "You have to do that to get here." And I said, "Look, I now know in my head that I want to be a CFO someday. And I know that if I want to do that I need to branch out. I need to learn more about other aspects of business, particularly operations. And what I also know is when I look at, folks that sit in that chair, largely speaking, most of them have done what I want to do, which is go back to school and, get their MBA and use what they learn, right? Because I'm 15 years into my career at this point, Jack. So I have two small kids, going back to school. It's like,
Can I ask you something? Let
yeah,
me, and I want to let the listeners know again. You arrived there in 2003, and again, we're jump forward 10 years. It's like 2013 or what have you. Two kids, and you're thinking about going back for your MBA, which you do. You go to Michigan, is that right? Now,
that's
how do you
correct.
do that? Is that night, or did you take off some time? Did they allow you to? Because you continue on. I know that you come back at Domino's, and within a short period of getting your degree, I think you're a vice president of finance. Am I right? So it opened some doors for you, no question.
Yeah, it definitely did. And so Michigan and the larger universities that are strong in business have an executive MBA program. So they tailor the program specifically for people like me who have generally the profile is you've been in the workforce for about 15 plus years. And it's a 20-month program, and essentially you go full steam during those 20 months. You're required to be on campus once a month during a weekend session, and then during the other weeks or days during the month you're working with your teams or individually on all your classwork. So essentially they set it up and they spoon feed you what classes you have to take, when you have to take them, and all those things, because they know that we're also working full time. So most of the people in that program are working full time, have been out of school, undergrad, 15 plus years. And so that's why the program's tailored to that. And look, picking U of M was an easy decision for me. It's a top 10 business school, and it was right down the street from Domino's headquarters in Ann Arbor. And Domino's was very supportive. I remember my CFO at the time telling me, "You don't have to do this, Michelle." And I said, "No, I actually do. And this is what I want to do." And they were very supportive.
At the time, was there anybody in the executive ranks who had done the same? And so there was some good evidence out there that this was a great path for you to take. I want to just step back a little in time for you, because there's a bigger overriding question that I always like to serve up for folks who have very long tenures, like you did, all totaled 17 years at Domino's. Starting out, you left Anderson, as you explained to us. It was really the dot-com era. There was a lot of attractive dot-coms that were giving away stock options and what have
Right.
you. And I think it speaks to you. You understood the value of a mentor, having somebody who's welcoming you into the organization, who knew, that person you trusted, and likewise, they knew you were a trusted entity. That was obvious, eclipsed any wild ideas of getting rich from the dot-coms or what have you, because I know there were opportunities. You could have gone that path. So many people did.
Absolutely. And I think you'll notice both from my jump from Anderson to Wholesome and then Wholesome to Domino's, both of those jumps were, people that I knew that knew
That's
me
right.
that I went to work with. And so, yeah, for me, it was an easy decision to follow someone that I trusted, because what's important to me is the culture that I work in and working with people that, I trust and I enjoy to work with. We all spend a lot of time at work, and we spend a lot of time with the people that we work with. So being in an environment and an atmosphere that I enjoy and working with those people is super important to me, because one of the learnings I had from Anderson was I had a chance to see so many different cultures, Jack, because, auditors just park themselves right into an office within the culture of the companies that they're auditing. And just having those 3 years and a chance to see different cultures, I learned at least what I didn't want to be a part of.
Yeah.
Right. So you see and you learn a lot from that. And so for me, following people that I trusted, that I knew were going to build solid cultures, far outweighed the lure of, more money or more title or more equity anywhere else. So that was important to me.
Let me list, and again, titles aren't what is important really, but I just want to show how you climbed the traditional ladder. You sort of joined them as a senior manager of corporate accounting and reporting. You were a manager, a unit controller.
You were a director, a corporate controller, director, assistant corporate controller, director of finance, supply chain. And again, after that, you get into much more senior ranks after you get your MBA. But you wore a lot of hats. You were steadily, uh, you know, promoted or had new
Yeah.
opportunities come your way. Um, at the same time, there must have been 7 years in the 7 year itch where
Yeah.
a recruiter came and said, there were opportunities. I don't know if you were thinking you wanted to be a CFO yet, really. And again, you're starting a family, no doubt, around that time. What are you thinking? Was there ever a time where there was a possibility you would have left?
Yeah, no. Look, my mindset was always about growing and developing in my career first and foremost.
Yeah.
Right? I never had a thought of I know there's a lot of women that once they have children end up exiting the workplace, but that, my mindset was always about growing and developing my career and putting myself in a position to where I was always learning. Right? And to your point, there were, different spans and layers that I did at Domino's and always running towards new opportunities. I can say this, yes, I would get calls from recruiters all the time, just like, I do now or did, 5 years ago, whenever. But I never thought about leaving or taking those calls because I was always being challenged, whether it was even at a certain level. It's, hey, Michelle, can you go and tackle this project? Hey, Michelle, let's look at this process. Hey, I need you to go fix this or do this. Hey, because with growing companies too, Jack, I think one of the things that's fun about that is that there's so much opportunity and so much to do. And, as Domino's continued to grow, I was there during a time period where they morphed into a tech company, right? When I joined, the IT department, right, was probably 20 to 30 people that, was operated more like a help desk that would, fix your PC and connect this or that. I mean, by the time I left, I think it was like 600 plus people, right, that worked in IT, and they were a tech company that, developed their own tech and, sold that to their franchisees. And it was just watching that morph into what it was pretty awesome.
Let me ask about, and again, you shared the timeline with us. So it went public shortly after your arrival, or a year or two within your arrival.
Yeah.
But as you progress up, you do get some investor relations
Yeah.
experience. And I think that's after your MBA, but clarify for us,
Yeah.
how were you able to get that experience?
Yeah. So once after that 10-year mark where I said, look, I need to get out of core accounting and reporting, right, I started to go into more operational FP&A roles, whether it was in supply chain or other parts of the business. And then ultimately, which led me to running global FP&A for the organization. And so during that time period is when I really started to get involved with prepping our CFO and CEO for the quarterly earnings calls, for investor meetings, just whatever they needed, right? During those quarterly calls, I would be in the room, right, helping to spoon feed answers to questions or, prepping them, those sorts of things. And then ultimately, right before I left, to running IR, right, which meant that I was interacting, directly with the analysts and investors and having those meetings. Now, on the other side of the equation, too, I was treasurer for 3 years, which meant I interacted with debt investors for those 3 years. So it's a different conversation, debt versus equity investors. And so I like to think even during those 3 years I spent doing treasury, I did a lot of IR on the debt side and educating people on that. And so for me, it just puts you in a position to where you're comfortable, right? Once I was able to get outside of, again, that core accounting and financial reporting and really dive into the different aspects of the operations of the business, it was very easy to talk to and message and prep. And remember, I have all the core knowledge about how the numbers work and how the financial statements move. I tell people this all the time, Jack. I say, look, accountants can morph into finance people. That's very easy for accountants to do because we understand, right? I say I'm a recovering accountant, but we understand the core financial statements. We understand debits and credits. We understand how numbers move. If you understand that, you can understand anything in finance. It's a lot more difficult, and this is my personal opinion. It's more difficult for someone who studies core finance to then go back and say, oh, do I really understand core accounting principles, right? And so for me, any question that people ask me, whether it was back then or even now at Portillo's, I joke with my accounting team all the time. I'm like, there's probably nothing you're going to get by me in terms of, what's going on in the financials, or if you want to talk technical accounting, or, as I look at the detailed P&Ls, all those things, I'm going to be able to probably ask some good questions that, stems from, just where my core is.
As you shared with us how Domino's really became a technology company in a sense, I'm curious on the perhaps conference calls in the investor relations realm, were there new metrics that you were trying to reveal to investors and analysts, how the company was really evolving? And I'm thinking of the mobile world as well, as the
Yeah.
mobile world came along. So you were discussing numbers that weren't necessarily financial any longer, just how many
You're
people
right.
downloaded the app, or what,
Yep.
what became the types of metrics you used to tell the story to better reveal how Domino's was evolving. Anything come to mind
Yeah.
in terms of what you would?
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think to your point, you start to talk more about what you're seeing in the underlying data around the guest experience, right? And so I think one of the early learnings that we had very early on was, Domino's, we had some hiccups, during the 2006, 2007, and then you lead into the Great Recession. And so one of the learnings once, we had the data and the information was that, we were just taking too much price, and that we had to drive sales through transactions or traffic in the restaurants. And it seems like silly to say that now, but that was a lesson that, as a big organization, right, you understanding those dynamics, wasn't easy when you didn't have the data. And then as you got the data, right, because it's a large franchise organization, and so you have to make sure you have the franchise information to disseminate, to dissect this information. And so we started to talk more about what the frequency of visits were, what that, to your point, the downloads of the apps, the conversion rate. As we talked about different offerings from a marketing standpoint, we would have these things called boost weeks, which I believe they just kicked off again this year, which were meant to drive traffic into the restaurants. So we would talk about, what those boost weeks would drive, and then how that converted the guests to more frequency of orders, and how that was a tactic to drive that frequency. So we would start to talk more about that, and how that was driving sales versus just, let me tell you what the revenue numbers are, what the change is, things like that. We started to talk about how technology played a role in driving traffic. And so you look at the trajectory, of what they had done, it was all driven by technology, whether it was the pizza tracker at the time was pretty revolutionary in terms of, you being able to go on your app and track your order, right? Whether it's in the oven, it's out for delivery. And so talking about things like that and investments, when you take it from a finance lens, making investments in technology and those initiatives and why it made sense, because then you tie it back to the payback, right? The payback of driving the frequency of that guest clearly, pays for itself, the investments that they were making in the technology platforms.
And as someone overseeing FP&A, you are connecting the dots for everyone, as you just described, I would imagine.
I was trying.
But so what is interesting as well to me is that, like so many senior professionals, there was movement during COVID. And of course, you step into a CFO role
Yep.
during COVID of December 2020. I don't want to tip our hand too much.
Yeah.
Because you were there at Domino's when COVID arrived. And is this a chapter we can talk a little bit about? Because I just can't imagine, again, for all of us to think a little bit back in time, it seems ages ago now, but that first quarter when it arrived and all the uncertainty around that, share with us some of what was happening at Domino's.
Yeah, like everyone else, right? We were determining how we needed to pivot in terms of the business. And so the good news for us at the time, for them at the time, was that the vast majority of the business, right, is clearly what I would call off-prem, right, dining. It's not like Domino's has the dining rooms that have to
That's
shut
right.
down, right, and need to worry about that. So Domino's actually was a business that thrived during COVID. But one of the things that needed pivoting was, okay, I used to, as an example, come and hand you your pizza at the door, right? Well, what am I going to do now? How do I know that you don't want that now? So, do I just drop it at your door? How does this work? So, and then tying in the technology, right, in terms of what the guest choice is, in terms of how they want to receive the food, was one of the things that we had to think about. And then really keeping the team members safe. I think that was a big concern as well, and continue to be a concern here at Portillo's as we were navigating through that as well, is how do you not just keep your guests safe, but how do you keep your own internal team members safe? And so when you think about getting that PPE equipment, right, that everyone was scrambling to getting hand sanitizers into your restaurants, just even the distance that the workers in the restaurants were working within each other. If the restaurant industry, if you go into a kitchen, you're going to see a lot of people working side by side in the kitchens. They're generally not working 6 feet apart. So how do we make sure that we staff the restaurants appropriately, right? So that there's enough distance to work, but still, be able to service the guests, and then getting people comfortable coming to work, Jack, right? I mean, to your point, you think about that time where there was a lot of unknowns, and the restaurant industry was one that, didn't completely shut down, right? And so we had to make sure that our team members felt safe coming to work, and that we were providing them with the protective equipment that made them feel safe. So those were some of the challenges that we dealt with at Domino's, that even when I left and came here to Portillo's, it was the same challenges that we saw here too.
Well, we might have a few more career-related questions. I am curious whether there was a recruiter involved that ultimately, or was it a relationship, or how did it come to be? And then we'll ask you about Portillo's. But I'm wondering when the epic decision after 17 years with one company, it's not a light decision to make.
No.
How some of the dynamics behind it, can you share?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was both relationships and a recruiter. So the funny story here is that the recruiter called me and told me about the opportunity, or sent me a note, email, LinkedIn. And I said, no, I'm not interested. Like, I'm not interested in leaving Domino's. I love it here. And I did. I loved it there. I loved the people. I thought, it was a great place to work. I mean, I wouldn't have stayed there for 17 years if it wasn't. And I said, no, I'm not interested. And so someone that I trusted, a mentor of mine, had a conversation with Berkshire Partners, the PE firm that owned Portillo's. And they were talking about how they were looking for a CFO. And that person said, well, you need to talk to Michelle. She'd be perfect. And they said, well, we tried to contact her through the recruiter and she told us no. And he said, well, let me talk to her. And so he called me and said, hey, I really think that you need to look into this opportunity. I think it's perfect for you. And I said, okay, I trust you. If you tell me to have the conversation, I'll have the conversation. And so I had the conversation, Jack, with the recruiter. And I knew Portillo's. I'm a Midwestern girl, grew up in Michigan. I spent a lot of time going to Chicago back and forth. And my husband will tell you that I was meant to be here, because as soon as I crossed the border into Illinois, I would always say I had to have an Italian beef sandwich. So I knew the brand. Once I learned more about what, they were from a growth standpoint, a cash flow standpoint, and then more important for me was the people. And I remember having the first conversation with our CEO, and I said, there's only two things I need that would cause me to leave Domino's, is that I have to be passionate about the brand and I have to fit the culture. I said, I don't care about going to a big company. I don't care about having X, Y, and Z. Those are the two things that I'm looking for. And look, in the back of my head, Jack, I always thought like I'd take everything that I learned at Domino's and take it to a smaller company and help grow that company. That was always like in the back of my head, like that's what I wanted to do. And so I said, passion for the brand, fit the culture. So the brand passion was definitely there, as I told you before. And then I had to take a leap of faith with the culture. I met our CEO, Michael Osanlu, and immediately said, this is someone I absolutely want to work for, and I think I have to work for. But the funny thing is I didn't actually step foot into our office, our headquarters, until the first day on the job, because it was COVID. And there
No,
was, nobody was in the office.
there was no vaccine yet. It was
There was no vaccine. Yep. I had to take a leap of faith based on Zoom calls and interviews and only meeting our CEO in person.
So, and forgive me, some of our listeners might not have a Portillo's near them. So please let me ask just a broad question. Tell us about Portillo's. What sets it apart? What are its offerings really about?
Yeah, no problem. We are actually a 60-year-old restaurant brand that started here in Chicago in 1963. Our founder, Dick Portillo, started us out of a little shack we call the Doghouse. And we've been growing. Particularly, we've accelerated growth since Dick sold the company to Berkshire Partners in 2014, and we went public and IPO'd in October of 2021. But we're at 78 restaurants today, and we have in 9 states with a growing national presence. Now, here's why I think we're special in the restaurant industry, and why I left an amazing brand like Domino's to come here. I think there's some differentiators for Portillo's. First, I think we have a very distinctive and diverse menu that offers something for everyone. And when you think about nationally, I get this question all the time, Jack. Well, who's a national competitor to Portillo's? Unlike pizza, where you can point to different national competitors, whether it's Papa John's or Little Caesars or Pizza Hut, same thing with tacos, chicken, etc. I can't with Portillo's. So my answer generally is everybody, particularly in QSR and fast casual. And I think we're definitely a hybrid between QSR, fast casual, with some elements of casual dining. So our restaurants have a very energetic and engaging atmosphere when you go to dine in. When you walk into a Portillo's, each one is unique to that local environment. So you'll walk in, you'll see a bunch of what I call tchotchkes on the wall and things that'll give you a sense that you're in the local community restaurant. You're going to smell the flavors of Portillo's. You're going to hear music playing. It's going to be a very vibrant atmosphere. The second thing I would say is that I think, we were definitely multi-channel before it was a thing. And so Portillo's, has dine-in. We have double drive-throughs in all of our restaurants. We do all of the off-prem delivery. We have a pretty good catering business as well. But I think what's most important, what's a very big differentiator for us, is our culture. And I told you that was important to me, right, in terms of what it would take for me to leave Domino's. It's a differentiator for me. It's very values-based. Our values are family, greatness, energy, and fun. And we do values-based hiring. And I feel like those aren't just words on a piece of paper or wall, but that we live and breathe those every day. And so I think about when you create that values-based culture, and you're going to interact not with me when you go and eat at Portillo's, but you're going to interact with that frontline team member. So if we take care of our team members, they're going to take care of the guests, and that'll ultimately take care of the shareholders, which I view as that virtuous cycle. For those that don't know our menu, our food, you can't have a good restaurant concept, Jack, unless you have craveable food. Our food is craveable. Think of Chicago favorites like Italian beef, Chicago hot dogs. Our burgers are fantastic. French fries, onion rings. We have a very good line of salads that some people are surprised by. But, I think our average restaurant, Jack, sells like almost 700,000 in just salads. So our average AUV of 8.5 million right now for a fast casual QSR restaurant concept is unheard of. It's the only, I think, concept that can touch us is probably Chick-fil-A in terms of that AUV, and that volume that we do is just unprecedented in the industry, which is fascinating to me.
Let me ask you something about culture, because you shared with us, okay, there was the initial company was sold. There's a transaction there. There's always, will it keep its culture? Will it change under a new ownership? Then the company goes public. It becomes a publicly traded company. Again, sort of might have an impact on culture, might not.
Yeah.
And then, Michelle Hook, who's accustomed to the Domino's, a publicly traded company, might understand the different nuances of the culture of a publicly traded restaurant company. How am I doing?
You're good. You're
It seems
good.
like you could play an important role here in
Given your past experience as a leader in a publicly traded company.
Yeah, I think it's important that we are a 60-year-old brand, but in some ways we're just learning in the, crawl, walk, run phase. We're just learning how to walk with certain processes, right? And so for me, there's a lot of opportunity to continue to create scalable processes here at this brand. And so that's the lens that, I've been trying to bring to the brand in terms of saying, okay, we're doing it this way. And, we're at a clip of growing 10% plus restaurants a year. As we scale, we can't continue to work this way. Right. And so thinking about whether it's in finance, whether it's in the development cycle, whether it's in, our IT department, our supply chain, right? All those areas have processes that we're used to running a certain way, but now that we continue to bolster growth, need to be scalable. But it's so important to me that you can't lose those values of family, greatness, energy, and fun. And so you always have to be rooted into the core of, what you're doing and how you go about doing things, I think is important, not just the end goal of, hey, I need to get from here to there, but how you get from here to there, I think is important, which involves, how you treat people, how you communicate, how you build teams, how you build relationships. All those things come into play for me when you talk about culture and then creating, again, those scalable processes. The good news for me, right, is that I have seen great, right, at Domino's. And so how do I bring those learnings here and, create that greatness in certain aspects of the business here? Because the core business here at Portillo's is fantastic. Again, you don't do the AUVs that we do if you don't have a fantastic restaurant concept, which is what we have. Our job is to scale this brand, but do it in a way that is, pays homage to the brand history and that we don't lose that. And so it's important to us as we continue to grow. It's why, Jack, we don't open a Portillo's unless it has an experienced general manager running the restaurant, because we need to make sure that the culture permeates through all of our restaurants, which are all company owned. We're not a franchise operation, so we control this. And we need to make sure that we maintain that within our restaurants.
Well, let me ask you then, again, when the company we know went public, there was quarterly reporting, there were, certain numbers that had to be produced regularly. But from a larger sort of cultural standpoint, I'm wondering if there was a number or a metric that you needed to educate the organization more broadly about. And in some ways, and maybe not, it bumped up against culture at times, that you needed to, and again, maybe it was, you had to have 20 conversations with different managers across the company to really get them to understand why here. I'm just thinking there had to be some priority or metric that you didn't think enough of the organization was paying attention to, or enough attention to. Anything?
Well, I will credit our COO, Derek Pratt, with, helping to facilitate a lot of, what I'm about to say, which is, he created a culture where, he coins the term, we want to be brilliant at the basics. He talks about metrics that matter. And so Derek joined the brand in September of 2020, right before I did. So, Derek and I have been lockstep in terms of, well, what are those metrics that matter? And for me, how can I support him in getting that information out there and disseminate it in a way that's not overwhelming to the business? Because I think one of the things that I noticed, Jack, when I first got here, which Derek did as well, was that there was a lot of, I'll call it canned reports going out to the field, and a lot, information that, my question is, does anyone even read this? Right? There's a lot of information. It's almost too much. And so partnering with Derek and getting him being, helping to be that thought leader with me on, well, what are those metrics? So we started to talk a lot about what I would call guest satisfaction metrics. So we talk about OSAT, overall satisfaction scores, and then there's subsets of that: order accuracy, speed of service, cleanliness of your restaurant. And then you start to layer in, value perception scores that necessarily wouldn't, we wouldn't get into the metrics that matter report, but we started to create this reporting framework, which had these various metrics that we wanted them to focus on because we knew if they did, there was a high correlation to sales, right? And so if you do these things and you take care of the guest, guess what's going to happen? They're going to come back to your restaurant, right? And so getting the field educated on that was something that Derek was very passionate about. And I played a support role, and my group did, in helping to develop the content and the reports and then disseminating it and then giving our insights, frankly, right? My team, I think, dived in and said, look, we're going to give some insights. We're going to identify, restaurants that we think need a little bit more attention than others. And so that's how we've, tried to work that in. And we've worked a little bit into our external messaging, Jack, to answer your question. So you'll hear Michael and I talk about, our OSAT scores, our value perception scores are the highest that they've been in several years, despite being in, a recessionary like environment and an environment has a lot of headwinds for restaurants. We use that as a metric we talk about externally and how we feel good about the health of the business. So that's how we tie it in externally and how we talk about it internally.
Yeah, we'd imagine your FP&A team isn't quite the size of Domino's.
No.
And we're curious how you organized it differently, or you realized you could leverage it more if it was organized differently in some way. Can you share with us how FP&A?
Yeah. So I brought in. We had a strong FP&A team when I joined. The work needed to be done on more of the accounting, financial reporting side. But the folks that we had in FP&A were very strong, and they remain very strong. They needed outside of myself, right? I brought in a new VP of FP&A, and Kyle joined us over a year ago, and he's been great. But one of the things that, I aligned with Kyle on early on is how I viewed FP&A, which is, there's an aspect of FP&A, which I'll call it operational FP&A, Jack. And that's the FP&A that supports the business. I'm going to work with, the restaurant operators. I'm going to work with my HR team, supply chain, whatever parts of the business. I'm going to work with you on your business needs. And then there's corporate FP&A, right? Corporate FP&A is Michelle needs board materials. I need prep for the quarterly earnings calls. We're doing a development day next week, right, in Dallas. I need some materials prep for that. I need analysis done for that, right? That's what I would call more corporate FP&A. And so, Kyle has really worked to align his resources on FP&A to those different work streams, and then really making sure that our business partners, again, whether it's on the ops side, the HR side, IT, have a business partner to work with on the FP&A team that knows their business that they can go to when they have questions or need some analysis done. So that's how I view the world. Again, it's a small, lean, but powerful team. They get a lot done.
Well, thank you for that. Want to jump to our finance strategic moment question, which is, we're just looking for one moment of insight that you've experienced along the way. We know it's a rather broad and random question in some ways, but anything come to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to pick one that's actually more recent. There's many moments back in time for me that I could point to, Jack, but recently, since my time here at Portillo's, we had an executive strategy session, which I'd say was about a year and a half ago. And this is a time, right, where you're coming off of Omicron, and you're starting to hit some of that heavy inflationary period in the business, right? And so we were just talking about the restaurant performance overall, but more importantly, how we were working. And then that led into how we were building our restaurants, right? The size of the restaurants. And from my lens, yes, Portillo's does fantastic AUVs, but I always, and this was just Michelle's personal lens, I always thought that there were some aspects of our restaurants that were overbuilt. And so I came from Domino's, right, which is a lens of they didn't have these big dining rooms, and most of their business, they had a heavy digital business. Portillo's business is 20% digital. And so for me, post COVID, our dine-in business went from 50% to about 35%. So there was an aspect of me that as we were having these conversations, I thought to myself, I think we're overbuilding our restaurants. I think where the puck's going is what we need to think about, because I think that dynamic isn't going to change. So our CEO said, great, Michelle, you and our head of marketing are going to lead the project, and we're going to call it Restaurant of the Future, and you guys are going to go figure that out. So for the last year and a half, we've been figuring that out, and it's been an awesome project. It's been very cross-functional. This isn't like a finance person's comfort zone, but I think one of the things that Michael, our CEO, realized is, it wasn't something where I had something in my head that it needed to be that way, right? I wasn't an operational person, so I take it very much with a data-driven lens. We did time and motion studies in our restaurants, and we spent a lot of time looking at those type of aspects, gathering a lot of data, looking at the conveyance in the kitchen and all those things. And yeah, we're, lo and behold, in the back half of 2024, we're going to build a much smaller restaurant. And it's going to have not only benefits on the cost side and the return side for investors, but on the team members' end, it's going to be easier for them to work and convey. And a Portillo's kitchen is very long and it's big. And so getting that engine right in the car was super important to us. But for me, that wasn't like a finance specific project, but I think it's going to drive tremendous change in our organization as we move forward. And I really do believe it's going to be a game changer for Portillo's. And we're going to, talk about that a lot at our development day next week with our analysts and investors. But I do think that that's going to be a big shift for us.
Are you tired of manual, fragmented, and time-consuming expense management processes? Then the U.S. Bank Commercial Rewards Card might be right for your business. More than just a card, it's an all-in-one card, expense, and travel management solution that replaces outdated expense management methods with a single intuitive platform. Specifically designed to scale with your growing business, it provides the control and real-time insights into spend that you need. It integrates with your existing tools, lets you set custom spend policies, captures all expenses automatically, and liability is kept at the corporate level. Employees can even book travel right in the platform. You also get to choose your rewards, either points or rebates, all while saving money with no annual fee. So why wait? Manage your cash flow better and streamline your business operations today with the U.S. Bank Commercial Rewards Card. Visit usbank.com/CFO to learn more. We are going to jump to our mentoring round, where I'll ask you several quick questions intended to inform and inspire future finance leaders. We'd like to know about your first 60 days. We touched on this earlier as CFO. When you just stepped into the role, there must have been something you wish, someone had told you. Here you were staring at the role for years, thinking all of what it might be about. But that first 60 days, if you could go back in time and just tell yourself something, what would it have been?
Well, look, Michael has been, he laughs about it now, but he's been honest with me, post. He's like, you had a little work to do on your team, right? So structurally, right, we were not set up to be a publicly ran finance organization. So that was pretty apparent to me even before I joined and saw the org chart, to be honest with you, Jack. And so, those were things that, there were some things I had to do more immediate. And then some things that, I had to align with Michael on, that we needed to start looking for external resources to supplement, just to put us in a position to be able to, again, do what we did in 21, which was go public, and then post public, be able to handle, right, all the aspects of public company reporting, et cetera. So, those, I guess I didn't know like the extent of it before I started. It wasn't, it wasn't everywhere. Like I said, my FP&A team was fantastic. So, and then there was other gaps that had to be filled in, et cetera. So that took a little bit of work and effort just to get the people in that we needed to, because we didn't have certain capabilities. It wasn't that the people that we had here in any way were bad or, that we needed to exit them. It was just playing to people's strengths and then supplementing resources with other capabilities. And so those were more the early, like first 60 to 90 days, just trying to set the organization and the finance organization up for success as we moved into the future, which I knew involved at some point, because we didn't decide that we were going to IPO, Jack, until May of 2021. It was a very fast-paced process. And so those were conversations I was having, in the January, February, March timeframe, even before we decided to go public. So those were some of the early learnings for me. But I tried to spend a lot of time just getting to know the business and being in restaurants and understanding who Portillo's was and what we were about.
Nice. Thank you for that. We always like to ask our guests to reflect a little bit on the personal side. And I don't want to put you on the spot here. I'm in the middle of replacing a question here where I usually ask for a personal habit or part of a daily routine. And I can ask that question. But I also, we were getting a lot of the same responses. So, I'm thinking I'd like to ask you, if it's okay, what is something that people generally don't know about you, something about you that people generally don't know?
Well, here's the thing is one of the things about me that people know is I bring my full self to work. Right. And so I'm a very authentic leader. So everyone knows, as an example, that I love sports. I love Michigan State in particular. Right. I'm a movie buff. I love to golf. I love spending time with my family. I love going to the lake and doing all those things. So there's not a lot that they don't know about me. I'd say, if you look back, in time and say, okay, are there things that I've not shared? Right. Like, I think one of the cool things that, I sometimes talk to people about is, post college, I backpacked in Europe for a month. When I was in Switzerland, I did this crazy bungee jumping from a cable car that was attached to the Alps. And it was like one of the most amazing experiences of my life. I don't tell that to a lot of people. So I guess I'll say that's one thing people probably don't know about me is that, I did that trip.
Yep.
It was very impactful for me. And, I did some things I wouldn't do today. Let me just say that.
No more bungee jumping, maybe. What about, would you have a book for us, or it doesn't have to be a business book, but just something you've enjoyed or influenced your thinking in one way or the other?
It's kind of an old one, but, it's one that came up more recently as we were talking about team dynamics. And I talked a lot about teams and, how to build healthy teams. So like the 5 dysfunctions of a team is always interesting to me, right? Because you go back and you talk about, okay, there's that foundation of trust, right? And then the pyramid kind of builds from there. And I think it's just really good at its core. And I know it's a little bit older book and I don't know if everyone's really heard about it, but for me, it's super easy to read and it just speaks to what is super important to me, which is building healthy teams. And it's why I said to you during my first 60 to 90 days, I was very focused on the team, because you can't be successful in anything that you do, especially at these levels, if you don't have a strong team. I think that for me, people have to understand, like, I went from, being good. You can be good individually at what you do and fantastic. But if you can't lead, develop, influence, build trust, build relationships, you can never be a strong leader at anything that you do. And so I think that really has always spoken to me. And if listeners have not heard about it, or I'd say just take a peek at it.
Where in your career do you wish someone first handed you that book?
Oh, early on, for sure. I mean, back in my auditing days at Anderson, right? Because that's all you do is teamwork, right? And especially.
So as a young professional, it would have given you a sense of why team building is so important. Not really, you're not managing yet, but you would understand I'm part of a bigger thing.
You would understand that, you got to build that trust. You got to have accountability, right? To get results and all those things, because everything that you do generally in business is going to involve a team, right? And it's going to
Yeah.
involve that interaction, whether it's your own team, whether it's a cross-functional team. At some point, you're not just going to sit in your chair and individually do your job. If you want to be a leader in an organization, there's plenty of jobs where, yes, you will be able to sit there and just, go through the checklist and pound through work every day. But if you want to be a leader, it's a different skill set.
Well, you should. I think Patrick Lancioni, the author, should speak at your next annual gathering for free after your endorsement with this one. We are up to our final question, which we ask you to look forward finally. And we're wondering what your priorities are as a finance leader over the next 12 months. What would those be?
Yeah, it's what I mentioned before, Jack, which is continuing to create those scalable processes. We're a fast growing company. We have the Restaurant of the Future project I mentioned. We just started and kicked off in July a large scale Oracle ERP implementation. So we're refreshing like back of the house. For me, we got to have solid foundations established in those core processes. And then you can start bolting on fancy things or the shiny new toy, whatever you want to do in the future. But for me, it's creating those scalable processes. I continue to work and partner with our Chief Development Officer on that entire process. As I mentioned, we're growing quick. Development is a massive focus for Portillo's as we move forward. So for me, partnering with our development team, making sure that I'm helping assess the new restaurants, making decisions around how we're building with the Restaurant of the Future, where we're building, is a massive priority for me as well as the rest of the leadership team. And then again, the processes on the back end and creating some of those capabilities and systems that are going to grow with us. So those are my priorities over the next 12 months.
Michelle Hook, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thanks for having me, Jack.
Hello, everyone. Jack here. Hope you've been enjoying our recent episodes of CFO Thought Leader. Please know that I don't take for granted this opportunity to serve you. Your time is valuable, and of course, so is the time of our CFO guests. I'll admit to you on certain weeks, I will pinch myself and say, hey, I get to do this for a living. I speak to all these impressive leaders. Undoubtedly, there are more aggressive interviewers out there, some who leave no stone unturned. But our swim lane is for finance leaders only. And those finance leaders have a unique style of leadership, one that is rooted in the burden of trust. In light of this, finance leaders must take great care not to forfeit this trust as they step into the role of being a more expressive leader. And that is what CFO Thought Leader is really about. That's why I try to remind myself week in, week out, how fortunate I am. Still, I need your help. Tell us what we're doing right. Tell us what we're doing wrong. Email me your comments at jack@cfothoughtleader.com. And please visit cfothoughtleader.com. You'll find a listener survey right on the nav bar. As always, thank you for listening.